Hey y'all. So, gonna start doing a series on today in history. Since we're not at school, we can at least do something about history as it happens. So, April 3rd, Friday, April 3rd. But on April 3rd, 1882, Jesse James, famed outlaw, met his tragic end. Now, y'all that were in U.S. history, 12th, 11th grade, y'all should know this, hopefully. But for the rest of you, if you don't know, I'm not going to give you the whole shebang on Jesse James, just what happened in history, just kind of leading up to his tragic end. Y'all have heard the name Jesse James. He was from Missouri, born 1847 in Kearney, Missouri, at his family farm. To his mother, Zerelda, and his dad died in childhood. His mother remarried later on. Skip forward about 14 years. 1861. What happened in 1861 in America? War between the states, Civil War. So he's from Missouri. Which side is Missouri on? Both, neither. So Missouri's a border state. So you've got a lot of Northern sympathizers, a lot of Southern sympathizers. Well, the James family is Southern sympathizers. Jesse James's brother Frank had already joined the Confederate guerrilla groups. A brutal war in Missouri during the time, neighbor on neighbor often. Anyway, Jesse James stayed at home. He was working the farm. He's just a young guy, 14 when it started. Well, when he was 16, Northern troops raided his family farm. They hanged his stepfather and beat and tortured Jesse. So after that, they're trying to get information. Well, after that, which side do you think Jesse was going to join? Well, he joined the Confederate side. He joined the Confederate guerrillas, found his brother at 16. By the time he was 17, the war was over. He'd been shot twice, once during the war, once on his way home. He was coming home with his brother under flag of truce, and they met some Northern troops from Wisconsin, and he got a bullet in the chest, managed to survive that. So the war ends. Well, not long after the war, him, his brother Frank, the younger brothers form a gang. Now, at first, they're like, well, we're just going to carry on the war. We're going to attack Northern-owned industries, Northern-owned banks, trains, things like that. But as vigilante justice goes, it turned into just plain crime in time. So they started this wave of bank robberies. Some say it was in 1866 was the first daylight bank robbery committed by Jesse James and his gang. Wave of bank robberies across Missouri, train robberies, uh, all over the place. They'd come back to the family farm, and sometimes they would leave double lives. So they would go out, raid, rob trains, rob banks. They kill people in these raids sometimes clerks, sometimes sheriffs. Sometimes the town would resist and fire back, and then they'd shoot townspeople. Occasionally, a gang member would die or be wounded, but not Jesse James or Frank James. Well, as time went on, they became more and more notorious. Now, the local populace actually liked Jesse James and his brother Frank and the gang. They liked him. There was this Robin Hood mentality with Jesse James, although there's no evidence that he actually gave any of his money he robbed back to the people. That myth persisted. But as time went on, they became more notorious. The governor put out a reward for them, wanted. The money started at $1,000 for Jesse James and Frank, $5,000 went on up and up and up. 1874, in his late 20s, Jesse James marries his cousin. And on their honeymoon, of course, what did they do? They robbed a bank on their honeymoon. So they have to hide a lot of places. They just had this wave of crime hit Missouri, Iowa, Tennessee, Arkansas, all over the place. Unprecedented wave of crime just by this one gang. So they travel all over. They have to hide. They hide in Tennessee for a time. They hide in Alabama actually for a time. They went and hid out in Dismal Canyons in North Alabama. Went out west for a time. Finally come back to Missouri. Meantime, the banks had gotten tired of getting their banks robbed, and so they hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to track down and catch the James Younger gang. So one night while they were away, the Pinkerton detectives came up on the family farm where Zerelda, Jesse James' mother, was, and also Jesse James' 8-year-old half-brother. The Pinkerton detectives firebombed the house through an incendiary device in the house, killed 8-year-old brother of Jesse and Frank, and maimed their mother for life. Her arm had to be amputated. So for the rest of her life, their mother was one-armed. This, of course, didn't make the James brothers reform. They just kind of intensified their crime. It also made Jesse and Frank kind of like martyrs in their local area. So anyway, life continued. They decided to do a big raid up north in Minnesota. They've never been that far north, Minnesota. They hadn't been heard. been seen there, so they didn't think they'd be suspected. But in this one big raid at Northfield, Minnesota, it all came down. The raid went wrong. Every member of the gang was killed, wounded, and captured except for Jesse and Frank. It all fell apart at that one raid. Actually, in that town in Minnesota, they still have an annual reenactment, the defeat of Jesse James reenactment every year. Anyway, Jesse and Frank hightail it back to Missouri, back home. You'd think they'd learn their lessons, but they didn't. They form a new gang. Entering that new gang was a young guy, cousin of Jesse James, named Bob Ford. He was 20 years old. They form a new gang. They hit a train very soon, rob a train very soon after that. The governor ups the ante on Jesse and Frank James. So they living under Jesse and Frank, then moved to St. Joseph, Missouri, in the city, and living under assumed names. So the people, their neighbors in St. Joseph, don't know it's Jesse and Frank James next door. They just think it's, I forget their alias, but these people living next door. They don't know it's Jesse James. Well, they meet there one morning, have their new gang with Bob Ford assembled, young man, and they're sitting around the breakfast table discussing their next moves, their next plans. And of course, there's Jesse James sitting here and Bob Ford, another fellow across the way. What Jesse did not know is that this 20-year-old Bob Ford, a new gang member, had been in contact with the governor of Missouri and had said, hey, I'll get Jesse James for you if I can get that reward. And then you join the gang. So sit around the breakfast table in St. Joseph, Missouri, and they're talking, discussing their next plans, and Jesse notices the picture on the wall is crooked. And so he turns around and gets up, leaves his gun on the table, and gets up to straighten the picture. And that's how Jesse James met his tragic end. Shot by one of his own gang members in the back while he was straightening a picture. All the time he was 34 years old. Now his mother, who was still alive, had put on the grave, it was big news, put on the grave, here lies a devoted husband and father, shot in the back by a coward and a traitor whose name is not worthy to appear here. Just a side note, Bob Ford, the guy who shot him, would later be gunned down and killed just a mere 10 years later. So Jesse James met his tragic end at 34 years old after a Robin Hood, a neo-Confederate, just a plain outlaw, probably just a plain outlaw. Killed a lot of people, robbed a lot of banks, trains, things like that. Moral of the story, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. All right, CCA High School, that's your Today in History. Mr. James Lyon signing out. Moral of the story, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. That's all. How should I end it? Like, can I pet that dog? All right, CC.
So go ahead and tell your class what just happened in the making of this fine
My
video.
very good jeans. My jeans I wear, y'all see me wear every Friday to school. I just ripped. My heart is broken. Like I've killed a good friend. Like Bob Ford killed Jesse James.
The sacrifices you go through, James.
The sacrifices I go through. For y'all, 7th through 12th grade, CCA, goodbye.